Reinventing ourselves. Hello, everyone. We have today in the house Dr. Ramesh. I think we don't need to have the introduction about her because she will be here today with us to share with us the insights. And I like to have Ramesh to share with us what is your first thought when we talk about reinventing ourselves, especially when the new year is coming.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because reinventing yourself is somewhat popular these days. And people look at it in terms of the kind of change that you are proactively pursuing. But also, reinvention can come about because in life you can meet with certain setbacks or crises. And as a result of that, you're sort of forced to, at that moment, change. So I guess fundamentally, it's about your ability to change, whether it is proactively or not proactively.
Lovely. We jump right into the topic, and to make people have a bit context about the conversation and how could we have a chance to discuss with Dr. Ramesh today. I remember I'm sitting in the room that we met at the first time, also in what we call like very innovative space, and it really inspires us to always innovating and changing. And I just recently had a chance to attend the program that the TLC Talent Leadership
Crucible.
And you and your college has really given us great quote that I think related to today. And I think people here who watching it right now, either individuals or leaders of any group or companies, and we know that we have responsibilities and we have opportunities to really change every single day, as you said. And that program has planted the seed on us that we are alive and we can always create who we want to become if it's important for us to fulfill something that we think is important to us. So I think today, if anyone who's watching this right now and you take this end of the year and the next year for reinventing yourself, but after that, you're also realizing it is like a daily thing. We have Dr. Ramesh will be sharing about her story, and I like also hearing the stories that you have other people. And we're
Sure.
going to have question and answer after some of my questions at the beginning. So share with us how many times you reinvented yourself.
So Jen, before I start off, I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of your house of guests. And it's my honor and pleasure to be here today. Thank you for also creating with the audience what I do at Talent Leadership Crucible, which is essentially all kinds of work around helping people to change perspectives and their frame in life. And, I would think that the earliest time when I had to change or reinvent myself was when my parents left Sri Lanka for Singapore, and I was 6 years old. So that was the first change. And if you read, books and research about change, they talk about how when you move countries, it can be a change, right? Because you're forced to be in a new environment. And as a result of that, then you have to figure out how you're going to make new friends, how you're going to cope in that environment. And so that forces you to reinvent yourself because what you did before may not necessarily work. So I started early, and that was the first experience.
Is this consciously or subconsciously then?
Well, I had no choice in the matter, right? Because my parents moved. My father had a job in Singapore, and so I went along. Right? So that was the first experience of having to reinvent myself. So then I think, yes, you were going to ask me something?
Yeah, I think for parents out there, they probably think like, okay, should I also create the environment for children to really make a little bit different perspective? But yeah, right. I think, that's one is like you didn't have choice, and then what?
Yes, actually, that's an interesting question that you asked, because for several years I was very upset with my parents for moving from Sri Lanka to Singapore, because, you know, when we came to Singapore, we didn't have the kind of support structure that was available in Singapore, I mean, in Sri Lanka. So my grandparents, my relatives, my cousins, you know, the things that I was used to, and I was the oldest grandchild. So it was a bit of a trauma. And the interesting piece is, this is something that I know on hindsight, because, you know, as a child, and especially in the 70s, you're not going to be talking to your parents, oh, that's a bad thing that you did, right? To take me away from Sri Lanka to Singapore. So then, but it's interesting because the human psychology is such that it still wants to communicate what is happening internally. And I guess how I communicated that externally was that I picked on something which was very symbolic of Singapore, and I made that my pain, which eventually became my parents' pain. So we all had to study a second language in Singapore to pass and go to the university. And that's, you know, you could do Malay, or you could do Tamil, or you could do Mandarin. And in my case, I studied Malay. And I remember that I was a borderline student. So it's like, you know, this year I will pass and next year I would fail, right? It was like a very anxious moment for my parents, less for me, but I think for my parents, it was more. And in a lot of ways, that was my communication to them, that I was unhappy. But you know, as I went through life until I was about 15, 16 years old, I didn't realize that the impact was really on myself. That, you know, on the one hand, I was communicating with my parents that I didn't like Singapore, so therefore I'm not going to study and do well with this second language. But really, who's getting the impact? Myself.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another journey, right? When you can self-reflect and you can see and you can start to connect the dots. And mind you, I didn't connect the dots and I didn't see that until I had my next setback, right? And then I had to change something. But really, the true reflection of why all this happened was something that I did later in my 30s rather than when I was still in my teenage years.
Beautiful, and I believe that we will go further. So if anyone is like waiting for the next part, I think it is very interesting when you said like the communication language that you wanted to tell your parents without knowing it or with knowing it. And maybe somebody here, if we have children or have friends or college, I think we can relate. Sometimes some kind of behaviors may tell us something that they have something inside. And I like to maybe dig deeper into that aspect later. And so you had that experience that created a little bit trauma inside you, and it put it out there with some kind of behaviors, and you realize that that is something that also come back. So if we do something, it's gonna come back. And later on, what happened, and how did you like constantly reinvent yourself?
Yeah, so I'm doing this, and I sit for my O levels, and you know, in Singapore at that point, it was mandatory that you passed your second language if you wanted to go to the university. And given my track record in the prior years up to O levels, where, you know, I was not really consistently passing my second language. And my father came to me and he said, you know, what are you going to do? Because I'd always wanted to study law at the university. And he said, well, you know, your grades for the second language is on and off and on and off. So maybe you should consider not going to the university. And that's like a shock, right? Because you had this vision, you have this this dream, right? And then you realize that what you've been doing now has an impact on that dream.
Wow, lovely. And your parent, your father was very sensitive. I guess he watched your dreams. Why did you want to go to law university, and how could you know that it was important for you to really see it as something that if it could not achieve, then you had to do something about it? Because I think we can relate to, like, we define what is important to us, either studying what or doing what in our life.
Mm. So, I mean, you know, I think I thought about doing law because most of my relatives in the family were lawyers, from my great-grandfather downwards. So it was like, you know, that's what everyone wanted to do. But in reality, I actually also secretly wanted to be a business person. So it turned out well, I guess, in my case, because I couldn't do law. I ended up actually going to the Polytechnic to do a diploma in shipping management. And that was really the defining moment when I went in one direction with my career versus another. Right? So what happened was I did a 3-year diploma in shipping management, and I you know, started to look at options more from a business perspective rather than from a legal perspective.
Oh, lovely. You said you secretly wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I also remember the place where I am sitting right now. We had a conversation between you and some other entrepreneurs, and some people, like, let's say, very experienced staff in some companies, and they came to this room because they wanted to hear your story about the book that you wrote. And you asked who wants to be the entrepreneur. So, and then you told us how you got that entrepreneurship spirit, or let's say the seed at the beginning. So
That's right.
Could you reveal that for us?
Sure. So, you know, when I was growing up as a young child, you know, when I was 5 years old, 6 years old, and right through my early teens, whenever my family members got together, like, you know, the older generation, like my grandmother, her brothers and sisters, or my mother's cousins, they'll always talk about this one particular uncle, right, who was given money by his father to go to England to study law. And instead of studying law, became a businessman, and a very successful businessman. And they will talk about how, you know, he was making money here, or he did this or did that. So, but then I realized that the flavor of the conversation, right, it was almost like they loved what he did, but they also hated the attention he got. And that paradox was something that I was intrigued by, right? I was thinking to myself, you know, all these people, they talk about him, right, in a way like he's not doing the proper thing, but yet they secretly admire him. Maybe that's what I want to do. And I think that's when really the seeds of entrepreneurship was, you know, nurtured for me. And I started to look at business as an option, and eventually, you know, starting my own business and running that.
Lovely, which means that we also see why we have this podcast or other things, because we want to hear and learn from the inspiring stories like yours. And you mentioned on the two sides, the paradox of the perspectives, right? Then there's some people, maybe they start off the journey of entrepreneur, or they start off something that they think that is for them. How can we really distinguish that is really the thing that is for us, or is something that because of other people? Because we know that if because of other people and it's not from deep within, then maybe it's not going to be like sustainable. So how did you later on recognize or nurture that, and you saw it as something that truly comes from within you?
Well, I think in our journey in life, we can be flexible. And in fact, we should be flexible, because then, and maybe we should give ourselves permission to be flexible, right? Because what may apply today might not apply tomorrow, and that's okay. If I look at my daughter, I think she's had already 4 or 5 careers in a short 5-year span, right? And then when I look at myself, maybe it was not the same, because I would have stayed longer in different industries. But the point is, and it's also related to reinventing. I think we have to give the 100% of ourselves in whatever that we are doing, right? It doesn't matter. And when we give 100% of ourselves in whatever that we are doing, we'll know very quickly whether this is something we want to do or we don't want to do. So when I look back at my own life in terms of two things, one is the industries that I was in, as well as the kind of careers that I had. I see that, I did move from one organization to another, but I didn't move from like one company in F&B to another company in F&B to another company. What I did was I literally changed, industries, right? So I went from, first I was in education, doing PR, and then I went to commodity trading. And then I went to shipping, and then in shipping, I did 2 or 3 different things. And then I went back to education, but this time looking after, the whole area of student affairs and activities for student development. Then I went into small business development. And then finally, at that point, you will be very surprised. I went into the first .com technology business in late 1999, not knowing anything about technology, right? But that's the jump, right? You're making from industry to industry, right? And what I've found is that what had me be successful, irrespective of which industry I went to, was the fact that I started to develop a kind of way to be a quick study, like, what can I take from this industry to this industry, even though it's not specific, but it's broad enough to help me to think through the frame or to think through and have a framework for analyzing the things which are similar, or to put it into a way which is easy for me to figure out things. So that's what I did. And then I also interchangeably worked sometimes in my own organization as an entrepreneur, or I worked for companies. But both times, I think what was interesting was that I always had a very developed sense of an entrepreneurial mindset. I want to spend some time to define what I define as an entrepreneurial mindset. I think an entrepreneurial mindset requires someone to be resourceful, which means that, when you look at a problem, you're looking for how to solve it and to try things out. You're willing to experiment. You're also someone who is able to deal with uncertainty and manage risk. So, you're not going to get upset because something didn't go in a particular way. And the last piece about having an entrepreneurial mindset is actually being very committed to creating value. You have to create value for yourself and value for others. And of course, in entrepreneurship, they will also talk about creating value around that business, product, or service that you bring into reality. So these were some of the things that, I always brought to whichever job that I was doing, whether I was employed by someone else or I employed myself in the business, right? It was that mindset. And I think this mindset is even more important today in the world of disruption, because we have to be resourceful. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But if we can figure it out, right, for ourselves, then we don't have to worry about anything.
No, I think we can discover the things that you share deeper in your book, and maybe meeting you directly. I see that the keyword you talk about at the beginning, we may have different choices, and when we want to reinvent ourselves, in which kind of version it is. The idea is that give 100% on that, and as the 100% of that, we will create the kind of, let's say, thinking process and the ability that we can actually use it for the next stage if we see that road is not really deeply connected with. And you mentioned that that is the reason why in each industry, people just like respect you because you was like own in. So I actually interview one of the also successful female entrepreneurs. She's a model and she's a businesswoman. She also a doctor, and she continuously expanded her values, like you said, in different industries. And I was asking the question that I really like your perspective. How can you know like when to really jump from one thing to another thing? Is this a moment you get respected, or is because that you think that this is the way to do? Because maybe you can even go higher on that industry, right? So how can we really know that it's time for us to expand that values, or to just choose another way?
Right. So I think it's going to be different for different people. And fundamentally, it's because even when you look at the entrepreneurial journey, as an entrepreneur, there are some of us who are very excited as startup entrepreneurs. That's the most chaotic type of entrepreneurship, because it's like you're bringing an idea into existence.
Yeah.
And everything, it's about change, you know, and when you go through that process, your level of engagement to build and the level of energy that you have to bring is a different kind from an entrepreneur who's managing a company which is already at a steady state, where you have systems, you have processes, and you have structures. And, you know, what you're doing here is basically growing the business from that base. And then, of course, you know, at some point, you get an entrepreneur who then has to deal with sometimes the business which has to, you know, deal with crisis. And that's almost like, you know, you are a startup entrepreneur. So I know for myself that I am very excited by something new. I proactively look for change. So I love being a startup entrepreneur. I hate structure. You know, I hate things which are, you know, calm and and stable. So most times for me, I'll get bored when something has come to a state where it's already stable. That's when I will look to go to another business.
Yeah, you might want to make yourself fail to start again.
That's right. So I think if you know, what I will tell the listeners at this point is that you may want to observe yourself and see whether you like you know, things to be stable, right? And you like to operate from that space, or you like to operate from a chaotic beginning stage. And that really will be the clue as to how and when you do the jumping in and out of projects.
Lovely.
And
so
ideas.
it's kind of checking in to really know what is important and what is the thing we like. So it's kind of touching on the part of self-awareness. How did you really like, and how did you really figure out like that was what you really enjoy, being that kind of startup entrepreneur? Is this checking in your feeling, or how was that process created?
Yeah. So yes, you know, it was partly through observation and being sensitive to the kind of inner thoughts that you have around managing something. You know, sometimes you go like, oh, this is boring, you know, not another day, or this is too stressful. You know, what are you saying in which of the situations, right? Sometimes it is working with a mentor or a coach, because they can reflect back to you something that you can't actually name yet. You know, you're feeling it, but you can't name it out, right? So if you can't name something, then it's really hard to also make sense out of it. And sometimes it's just, you know, unfortunately, success and failure. And that also teaches you something that, okay, this is what I'm good at, but maybe I don't like it. I like this, but I'm really not good at this. So then what's the compromise, right? So you've got to go through that journey. And more recently, one of the things that I found for many people, especially for our younger generation, because they've had to grow so quickly with a lot of information being available readily. And I think the missing piece, or sometimes the piece that can support them, is to discover their North Star. Like, what's my purpose? Who am I? Right? And that also guides you, because although it can be a facilitated process where you learn about yourself, at least then you start to see, oh, yeah, how come I make those choices in these moments, right? And they are so consistent. And that's another way in which you can start to get greater awareness about yourself.
You mentioned North Star. What is yours, and how did you define that? Is this something also linking with your awareness?
Yeah. So so what I found over time was that I was always attracted to creating things. Like creating, not just creating things, but creating the pathway for something new. And so, I used to think, how come I don't stay on for a long time with something? I go and start something, and whatever I start is like, it's new to the world at some point, because like I told you, right? My first technology company, which I wanted to, at some point, I told you before that I wanted to list, was part of the early .com wave in 1999, in 2000. And then, subsequently, I also did several other businesses which were on the cutting edge, right? And what I saw was that I was always interested to look and explore to see how you can create a pathway to something which was new. And then when I eventually did the work on myself to, like a personal development program, and to start to also do other practices like meditation, I realized that what actually is very satisfying for me and gives me fulfillment is to look at raising or elevating consciousness. And another word for consciousness is awareness.
Yeah.
And awareness is about, our self-awareness, and it's about social awareness. And, when we can know more about ourselves and about other people and situation, we get the opportunity to learn and change and become that new emerging self.
Yeah.
And I think I see that as my purpose, that whatever I'm doing is contributing to that.
Yeah, lovely. So I think it's kind of evolve over time, your North Star, as you continuously raising your awareness, your consciousness, and now you're helping other people to do it. And so what is a failure, if you want to call it? I don't know the definition of everyone here. The one probably, like, let's say, the version of yourself that you reinvented from the previous one, and it felt like it was not really something that demonstrate all the values from within you.
I think one of the biggest obstacle for people to really explore themselves and their potential and to have greater awareness, right, is this fear of failure. And it comes from, unfortunately, how our society defines failure versus success.
Yeah.
I was lucky. I grew up in an environment where my mother actually taught us that failure is the pillar in the house of success.
Yeah.
Right?
Lovely.
So every time I failed, it is like, oh, okay, it's another house, another pillar in the house of success, right? It's not like, oh my God, I'm a bad person, I'm not good enough, I'm lousy, I'm stupid, I have to hide, I'm embarrassed. No, that wasn't there. Now, but then it wasn't there for, let's say, trying out new ideas, for doing that in a corporate situation. But that fear of failure also is different for us in different situations. So I've had failure in my personal life as much as I've had failure in my business life. And I know that in personal life, it had been harder to pick up the pieces and to move on, right? And so for each of us, we may find that we find it easier to pick up the pieces in one area of our life versus another. So that's another awareness that we can also bring to the table to understand ourselves. Where, do we have a greater sense of confidence? Is it at work or is it at home? And above all, are we stopped by failure at work or at home? And if we are, then what's our definition of failure? And what is our definition of success?
So it's so beautiful that I think we can just take home, and every time we just like do something we didn't achieve or we don't achieve what we want, we can see, like you said, like your mom said, oh, we have the house even more stable, the house of success. So I heard about the fear of success. Is it something that also like coming up anytime in your journey where you work with a lot of people?
Yes.
Because it's
so I think what you're talking about is, can people be actually fearful of success?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I've experienced that. And in my work with women leaders and women entrepreneurs, they particularly suffer from this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question from that to have more context for you for sharing. I had a alumni. She particularly gave the question that she could not want to step out to be shy because she thought that her family would not like it when she is talked by other people about how great she is, and she thought it probably would make her life becomes like let's say different, because as a woman she should not be just so out there. So that's why she could not like execute on her startup idea, even she always wanted to do it for many years.
Yes.
And that's the reason why she came to that program. So I thought I could call it like the fear of success in a way.
So it's interesting because what you're talking about is something that they call as the tall poppy syndrome. And it's like if everything is this level and then suddenly you have a plant which is here, everyone's eyes is focused on that, right? And if you look at our societies, especially let's say from the 70s to today, there's been transformation going on in terms of how people perceive what women do and what men do. And in my experience in Vietnam, at least from the time I've been coming as late 1990s, is that women are empowered and they have a say in businesses and decision making. Yeah. However, when they go home, they also have a traditional role to play as a mother, as a wife, as a sister, and that hierarchy of, from the societal as well as the cultural context requires a woman, no matter how successful and dynamic and high-powered she may be outside, to play a different role at home. And that becomes a clash, right? About, in terms of what she can do and what she can't. And sometimes it's because of this societal role that they may prefer not to stick out because it will draw attention back to this. And I think that is still there in most societies for women. And also the second piece that women suffer through is this whole notion of imposter syndrome. Right? That they feel a lack of confidence often. And one of the things that's happening around the world is to try and encourage more women to be part of the boards of companies, right? Because I think on average, even in developed countries, only about 10% of the board are women. So as part of diversity and better corporate governance, it makes sense to have this number go up to 50, because after all, we are 50% of the population. But that's not happening. And it doesn't happen because from the grassroots level upwards, we don't have equal representation of women at the different levels of power structure. So then you can't miraculously have, 50% of women at the board level if, let's say, they join an engineering company, right? And there's only 1 out of 100. And Jen, you would have had that experience because you're an engineer, you're trained engineer, and you know that, right? And it was the same for me in shipping, because in shipping, you don't get women too. Right. And so when you start to look at statistics from that level, you can understand why it's so low at the top piece, right? And so over time, because you have to make presentation to men and you have to deal with how they interact as a network themselves, you can take on sometimes experiencing imposter syndrome, or on the other side, cover up your imposter syndrome by becoming too aggressive. So it can be
Yeah.
both ways.
So the idea is like maybe men also have some kind of let's
Tall
say
poppy.
cycles, yeah, and the idea is that they all actually socially constructed, and if something's really important, just keep coming up, yeah, as an entrepreneurship journey or some kind of education journey that you want to jump in. If it keep coming back, I think we need to do something about it. Otherwise, we will feel like it's very the soul is not going to be in peace. Right? So, what is the next reinvention for yourself when you have a lot of different successful, or let's say very impactful version of yourself that you have created in different industries, and now you're kind of working, I would say, in the level where it can go to any industries, right? Raising the consciousness. So what is that next reinvention for yourself?
I think it starts off first with a commitment to keep learning. And if we have learning as a passion, right, that in every situation that we look to, like, okay, what can I learn? Like what I did well or what I did wrongly, right? Because absolutely you can find that. You're never going to be perfect. Right? But if you can self-reflect and see that there was something that you can learn from a particular situation, that will always keep you on that path towards discovering a new self.
Yeah.
But in terms of reinvention, I think, it requires us to reflect a little bit, and it has to go beyond just a superficial, okay, this is something that I can learn, to, okay, where is the pain in my life, right? Because there is pain. There is pain in the sense that there is something that I'm not doing, there's something that I'm not enjoying, or there's something that I'm getting that I don't want. And I think to be able to use that pain to give us the energy to reinvent ourselves, we have to be open to tell the truth and to own that whatever that we are doing is not working and it's not what we want. And until we come to that point, it's going to be difficult to reinvent. So we have to own the need to reinvent. And sometimes, we are lucky, we may have a crisis, and that forces us to reinvent. I don't know, Jen, but, for a while, for about 10 years, I used to shave my head bald. Let me show you. Let me show you a picture of that. So I used to look like this in
like
the late 90s, right?
Like a monk.
Yeah. And
what is that the name for the lady here?
None.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to do that over a period of 10 years, right? I would shave my head once or twice a year. And then I stopped, because in the beginning when I did that, it reminded me of how everything can go back to zero. But I tell you, in 12 hours, my mind went back to the norm. Why? Because a little bit of hair showed up. And then the whole conversation of what shall I do? How shall I have it? How shall I style it? All started, right? And so it was for me to actually, because something had happened in 1997, and I had an experience where I saw that irrespective of who I was and my success and my failure and my roles and my position, I discovered in that moment, because I was looking at myself in the mirror, that I am me and that no one can take that away from me.
Yeah.
And so shaving the head was part of reminding me about that that moment. But then in the 10 years, I discovered that I became attached to the behavior, the sensation, the responses of shaving my head. And then I stopped because it didn't have the power to give that new insight anymore. And that's what can happen as well sometimes when things become a habit or a routine. We need to break that too.
Yeah, it's so important to really be brave and be honest enough to face the truth of something is going on, and to really relearn. And I learned that a lot, like especially when also I'm passionate on personal leadership development, and I have learned from programs, especially the end of the year or New Year. And I had a chance to attend your program. I don't know, you share a little bit about it. And I know that there's so many things that we have learned, and we were still keeping ourselves. It's also hindered how we actually can see like a bigger pictures. And constantly we know that, but we're still doing it. And as I did that conversation with Prani on the day, and it's so interesting to really, if we can record ourselves, we can, oh, this is me, right? And as you said, you actually had the behavior that you shave your hand. You realize that something has to come from within to really make that kind of shift, and we really need to own that. So I think for our listeners, especially, we sometimes borrow the new year to really look at like what is something here that we're not feeling great for long, and we really need to own that and to do something about it. And I have a question from the audience. I know that Miss Kang will comes in and ask a question or the question from somebody. If people listening to the stories, especially when they get inspired by you, or in general, we bring people in to inspire other people to do something, especially reinventing themselves in this episode. It's so like kind of easy for us to do something, kind of to become that person subconsciously in a way. So how can we really constantly apply or do something to become better of ourselves, not going to the trap of following that road of mimicking that person, and then we felt like, oh, this is not really me.
So I think the key thing that I want to share about reinventing yourself is that it has got two components. The first part is that it's internal. So it's about reflecting on reflecting and identifying our patterns of behavior, our values, as well as the kind of activities that we do. Okay. And it could be also our perspective, like what are the kind of perspectives that we have. So that's all internal reflection, right? And then it also involves the external world, in the sense that if any one of those above things does not serve us, right, we then go about proactively changing something. So we have to change our frame or our pattern or our value, so that we can change the activities, right? So that we can have a new result. And we need to understand that. Now, it can be different for different people, but that's really the key to reinvention. There's no shortcut.
Yeah.
You can't take a magic pill and say, oh, I'm reinvented.
Yeah, I think we often like some kind of shortcut, and in the long run, we know that it is a long-term, not the long-term solution. And we know that it's kind of like planting a seed, and then it takes time to grow. Even if this is very like short-term kind of way, let's say different kind of plants, but it takes time. And I think that the things that I see in your journey, we learn that it's really interesting if we really internally like transform, and we can experience a lot of different dimensions of ourselves. Miss Kang had also difficult time in her life last year, and I think she overcome that, and I think internally. So I think she has some things to share with us, and maybe bring in a question.
Great.
One more question from the audience.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I actually feel thankful for connecting to Jen and also different people like you with great stories. And when having a reinventions in life, do you think that is a kind of like creating a series of new habits to adapt to a new change, and the habits can turn to be either good or painful because when we step out from the comfort zone is somehow reflect to a bad experience or a new curious experience, somehow like that. Because my experience is within the same situation, like not the different place, or like I stay in the same environment, same situation, but I have to step out with some new positive habits.
Right. So I think that's really great, because ultimately to change any kind of behavior and to have a new life or habit, you've got to put in the time and effort. But maybe what's missing, right, is why did you want to change in the first place? And understanding why that was important for you. So if you, for instance, knew that you needed to make the change and this was the goal or this was the intention, then at least that's why you're doing it. And you're happy to do it even if it is painful, right? And I think if we are not connected to that goal, it becomes easy for us not to continue. And sometimes it can also become very, it can be a struggle, because we don't, we want to give up because we are not connected to why this is important. So why this is important is a critical piece to understand when we want to reinvent ourselves.
So the key trigger to reinvent is the purpose, the why that drive you, right?
Yeah, why is this important, right? Because honestly, right, most times we reinvent ourselves because we think that whatever that we're doing right now no longer serves us, or that we need a change. So that might be the place where we start. But then we have to go beyond just that, because otherwise it just becomes a problem and a solution. And then therefore it becomes the next problem, right? So if we can then expand that discovery into why is that important, to see what is that bigger picture, because like if you could see how in your own life as your North Star, as your purpose, this is where you are, the biggest frame. And then you can see that this becomes consistent. This new action becomes consistent. This new habit becomes consistent. Otherwise, it's a struggle.
Yeah, you are true. Because I can see my friends, like they cannot find out a real purpose, but really feel bored and negative and want to give up the current situation. So just try new things all the time.
Yes. So in our program called the Sustainable Success for Collective Advantage, we call that the surviving frame. And then there is a thriving frame. So the question is, what would be the thriving frame that you can take on for life?
I see.
Beautiful. I think you really give us the framework to really see the frame that defining what is hindering us. And I believe that we come into the wrapping up. And thank you, Khanh, for bringing the question.
Yes.
I think Ramesh has shared with us a very, let's say, framework of identify what's important, why we want to do it, and is this really something that we want to change, and then also the element of walking into that journey and really keep reflecting to really see what is no star for us. So we're gonna come to the end with the 5-second rule game.
Okay.
Yeah, where everyone can bring in here or bring out here some kind of very practical. And at the end of that game, we love to really hear and hear verbally from you. How can we learn more from you, and what is your coming program in Vietnam or in the world, and your book and all the things we can keep in touch with you deeper.
Okay.
So there will be around 3 questions. The
Okay.
first one is one book to really read to then take action to reinvent ourselves in 2023.
Oh.
Apart from your book.
Actually, I find that you can read any book, and I don't follow books specifically. So I invite the readers to go to a bookshop, catch any book that catches your eye, and just read it.
I love this because you really give us the choice that we actually can make the decision that we want to do something. And maybe the act of reading the book is just like to demonstrate for that decision. And love to see your book in the bookshelves in Vietnam.
That's right. This is the English version.
Oh, lovely.
So I'll have to wait for it to be translated into Vietnamese.
Yeah, so next year. So watch out on it, everyone. And the second one is the one person that you think we can connect to learn from or read from, to inspire some new perspective for our reinvention.
I personally think that the most important person that we have to be connected to moment by moment is ourselves. And often when we are disconnected from ourselves, right, as in our true self, the purpose, that's when we go off track and we lose the inspiration and the fulfillment in life. So, you know, it can be in simple practices like meditation or long walks or reading a book, but we have to find something every day to connect ourselves back to ourselves.
Lori, you got my question. The last one, you already guessed it. What is the one habit that you recommend us? If it's still something you just mentioned, it's okay. But if you can share that one habits for us to connect better with ourselves, read the book within us.
Yeah, you know, maybe some kind of mindfulness practice every day. That's one of the best ways in which we can get connected.
If you write the next book, this is an extra question. What is the name of the next book?
It's called The Big Jump into Crisis-Ready Mindset.
So this is still like with the big jump, right? So you had a series of the book with like the big jump, and the first one and the second one, the next one with the crisis.
Right.
Yeah, wow, beautiful. So next time we will look for the series of that book in the bookshelf, and that also gives us the hints of different stages to reinvent ourselves, reinvent impact out there we make. So what is next for us to connect with you, learn from you more in 2023?
Well, I'm I'm in LinkedIn. You can, connect me through that. I'm in Facebook, and I come and do some work with you, Jen, at Lab to Market, and I'm quite active in the startups ecosystem in Vietnam. And so there'll be many opportunities, I'm sure, that we can be connected.
So you want to share about your book coming into Vietnamese language or the program?
Yeah, sure. So I wrote this, I actually wrote this book called The Big Jump into Entrepreneurship. It's in 2003. And this year I sort of updated it and called it 2.0, The Big Jump into Entrepreneurship 2.0. And I take people through the journey of discovering their entrepreneurial mindset, and then to actually take that to discover an idea or a product in terms of a product or a service, and how to assess it and to find the market opportunities so that they can launch it as a business.
Mhm.
And the idea is that, you know, even if you don't become an entrepreneur, you can definitely use the entrepreneurial mindset for all areas of your life. And that's what I'm championing and, you know, wanting everyone to do, you know,
Yeah.
take on an entrepreneurial mindset
Yeah.
first.
The one that you mentioned, we bring up again to wrap up, is to be resourceful, which is
Yes.
always seeing the opportunities from the challenges or difficulties, and willing to take risks that we prepare. Let's say prepare the risk to take risks. So
Yes.
welcome the uncertainty and create values for ourselves and for other people. And I
Yes.
believe today we got a lot of values that we can just say put it down on paper and maybe practice one piece of that in the new year. We already can see that the next level of the concertness. And I believe that we're gonna go to sleep sometime this evening in Vietnam, or even anyone not in Vietnam, then the new day. What is the challenge that you think you give us so we can raise the level of entrepreneurship mindset or concertness? One challenge.
I think what I would say is it's not a challenge. It can be a challenge. It is to practice gratitude daily.
Thank you.
So find something to be grateful for every day. And that will keep us centered and grounded, no matter how bad or how great the day was. Because remember, it is every day for many years that we have to be on this journey.
Thank you.
Welcome.
We love to express our gratitude. You kind of wanna express the gratitude to Ramesh. I just think like personally and personal life and work life, you have really care and very thoughtful when asking me and also my team. So I'm really grateful for that, because I think that that kind of human connection is just it's very meaningful, and it's like out of work, if the person still very care about you, it mean a lot. Yeah. So
I got that. Thank you. And, you know, it's been my privilege to get to know you and to work with you, and you too, Kang and Jen.
Chị Khánh.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. And we hope and looking forward to read the books, The Big Jump into Entrepreneurship.
Maybe she can do
2.0.
a little bit
Yes.
translation of that too.
That's right.
Yeah. Of
It's a
course.
second one. And hope everyone gonna have a big jump in 2023. Keep reinventing the thoughts yourself, and maybe one day we will hear your story and either here or maybe Dr. Ramesh's podcast. She also had a podcast. I think you can check all her work through her LinkedIn, and especially some programs that she will be continue doing in Vietnam. So have a wonderful night for everyone, or wonderful day. We see you in the next jump.
That's right. All the best for 2023, everyone.
Yeah, all the best.